Hello, and welcome back to Brutally Benevolent. So, this is the first episode of the podcast that I've recorded for YouTube. It's only the second episode of the podcast in general. So, if you're listening to us wherever you listen to podcasts, just know that you can also find the podcast on YouTube if you want to watch me talk instead of just listening to. And it's not us, it's just me. But I wanted to start today. First of all, I apologize. I uploaded a second episode and I wasn't thrilled with it. So I took that down and I'm doing this one instead. The subject matter of the original second episode I will do again because it's very interesting. And I just didn't do enough research and it wasn't my favorite. I don't think it was my best work. So I wanted to start today by revisiting the paradox that I left you with at the end of my first episode, and that was the altruistic, egoistic paradox. Essentially, it says that, or it asks the question, can any action or any act be truly altruistic if there's any self-satisfaction or self-fulfillment that you get from it? I think we could debate that for a long time. In fact, lots of people have debated that for a long time. And so there are a few schools of thought, I guess, that get, a little bit complicated, but fun to learn about and read about. The philosophical versus the psychological school of thought as far as altruism by itself goes. And egoism is a part of that. So, what is altruism? Well, the dictionary defines altruism as the principle or practice of unselfish concern for or the devotion to the welfare of others. And so it specifically says that it has to be unselfish, right? And so that's the part that I want to dive into first, and that's more the philosophical side disagrees with the psychological side as far as how we look at altruistic actions. So the philosophical side essentially says that there doesn't have to be necessarily a positive impact. You could do something to prevent something bad from happening to somebody else. For example, let's say that someone is driving a car. And while they're driving a car, they're going slow and being cautious because they're in a place where kids are out playing. Well, that could be considered an altruistic act because you're not doing anything to make the kids better off, but you are intentionally doing something to not make them worse off. And that act in and of itself is altruistic, even if it's not necessarily intentional. So the flip side to that coin is that the driver may be aware that there are some negative impacts to not driving safely. For example, you hit a kid. Aside from having hit the kid, the negative impact or repercussions on yourself could be, increased insurance premiums. The fact that you hit a kid. We can probably just leave it at that. But there are negative impacts that would come back to you. Getting a ticket for reckless driving, getting arrested, insurance premiums, all kinds of things. And so even though you're driving cautiously so that you don't hurt the kids, there's a small part of you that might be driving slowly so that you don't get in trouble. At least most people are probably aware of that fact, right? Now, this is where it gets kind of fun because, the paradox of egoism and altruism basically says that, or asks the question, can anything be truly altruistic if there is a motive of selfishness or self-interest attached to it? And the philosophical side basically says that no single motive can be characterized as both altruistic and egoistic or in one's own self-interest. However, a single act can contain both motives, So a single act, the act of driving your car cautiously, can contain both motives. You can be motivated by not wanting to hit the kids, and you can be motivated by not wanting to get in trouble for hitting the kids. So it is possible to have both motives attached to that single act. And I thought that was really interesting and fun way to kind of look at it. So from the philosophical side, yes, there can be acts of altruism that are not selfishly that have a selfish component to them, but they remain altruistic because you are doing something good, regardless of whether or not you are getting something out of it or you're even thinking about your own self-interest. So, shifting gears a little bit, looking at the psychological side of things, there is something called psychological egoism. And I want to make it clear that we're talking about egoism, not egotism. There's a difference. And I go over that difference in the first episode, but essentially it's egotism is self-inflated, your self-inflated sense of self. And egoism is just the your mind's eye, basically. It's how we view ourselves, and it's ego is just the I. It's an alternative, almost an alternate personality. I go into that a lot deeper in the first episode. Really interesting stuff. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, go back and listen to that. But psychological egoism essentially says that altruism can't exist because everything that we do is self-motivated. Everything. And what motivates us from a psychological standpoint is desire. And we use desire. All things are driven by desire. And desire can be understood by what's called the hunger model. And so basically, the way you're looking at that is when you're hungry, you want food, right? And maybe you want a particular kind of food. It doesn't matter. But are you really driven by the food, or are you driven by the desire for the feeling of satisfaction that comes after eating the food? And feel the feeling of being satiated. So are we really, what in the brain is motivating us to want to eat? Yeah, sure, lots of food tastes really good. Maybe that motivates us to eat more than we should sometimes. But we're driven to eat by the desire for the satisfaction and the feeling of satiation. And so because of that, that's the model that we use to look at all forms of self-interest. Your brain is always looking for that little bit of that little hit of serotonin, maybe, which is what drives that feeling of being full and satisfied after you eat or after sex, what makes you sleepy and feeling good, right? So that's more what our brain is chasing rather than the need for calories and fuel. And so because of that, if all motivation is based on desire, then psychological egoism must be true, and the stance there is that altruism doesn't even exist. And it could be, an example aside from food is giving somebody a gift, right? Outside of their birthday or anything else, you just show up randomly and give somebody a gift. And where we can kind of place desire and that hunger model in that scenario is you're hungry for their reaction and their approval of you for having given them a gift. And that's fine. You're still doing something nice for somebody, right? So what's the problem? Where's the victim? Even if it is motivated by your own desire to see them gratified by the gift that you gave them, who cares? You're still doing something nice, right? And I think that's the most important thing to remember. And another way that we could look at it is, or another way psychologists look at altruism is a coping mechanism for anxiety, right? It's the ability to take the focus off of yourself and place the focus on helping somebody else. So in a sense, removing yourself from the situation and allowing yourself just to focus on helping somebody else. Another part of that, your altruism could be motivated by other things like obtaining a sense of pride and satisfaction in what you've done. It could be motivated by the expectation of pride or reciprocity, making people proud of you or expecting something in return. Maybe it's just the way that I am, but I rarely do something nice for somebody with the expectation of reciprocity. And so to me, that I want to assume that the vast majority of people are not doing things just to get something in return. And even if that's mostly the case, it doesn't mean that, if you do something nice for somebody, it doesn't mean that down the road you're going to need help and you might remind that person. And so it could, there's a potential for being inconvenient to them because you need help. And we're going to talk about that, needing help, offering help, and accepting help a little bit more in a minute. But, going back to, doing something nice for somebody else or an altruistic act on the basis of pride or reciprocity, or maybe you could be trying to secure your place in heaven. That's why you go and work at food banks. Great. You're working at a food bank or whatever it might be, volunteering, however you might want to volunteer. It could be anything. And that's great. You're still doing something nice, and in return, you might be getting into heaven. Nothing wrong with that. Another way, or if, let's say, if none of those are the motive, maybe your altruistic acts are to cover up feelings of shame or guilt because of things that you have done in the past that weren't so altruistic. Maybe they were flat out bad. And doing nice things for other people allows you to relieve yourself of some of that feeling of shame or guilt. I used to say to people, I've always been very giving, and I don't know for me where it comes from and why I am the way I am. But I used to tell people when I would get caught doing something nice for somebody and somebody would say, "Oh, you're such a good person." I'd say, "Well, no, I just have to do a lot of nice things to redeem what an unbelievable piece of shit I really am." And of course, that's not true. I don't know. Maybe it is. I was an alcoholic for a long time, am an alcoholic, but in recovery now, and I probably did a lot of really shitty things. And I'm sure that we'll chase that rabbit's foot down a hole. Is that even a saying? That was dumb. That's not even a saying. I'm sure we'll explore in a future episode at some point my alcoholism and the things that I did or don't remember doing. But doing nice things for other people, being altruistic, could be a way of covering up or hiding your own shame or guilt, or relieving yourself of that shame or guilt because of things that you've done in the past. And whatever the case is, as long you're doing nice things for people, right? You're helping somebody else. So I don't know, who cares? Who cares if there's self-satisfaction involved? Now, obviously, there's been a long-running philosophical, psychological debate on this topic of egoism or of altruism and whether or not it really exists, whether it can exist, which is kind of a funny phrase. I mean, we've created the word, so it must exist because we made a word for it. But whether or not it can be real or not real, I don't know. Tell me your thoughts. I'm trying to be more active on social media, so I'd love to have more of a discussion there. And I will link my social media accounts. Hopefully they'll show up. I don't really know what I'm doing, but we'll figure it out as we go. But regardless of how you feel about whether altruism can exist, whether it can't exist, if everything is motivated by desire, whatever it is, I think the most important thing is to do nice things for people once in a while, because it could be a friend, or just random acts of kindness. There is research that shows that random acts of kindness have a fairly profound impact on our own mental health. So there we go. This ties back into whether or not anything can be really altruistic. Random, even if you're not aware, I guess, of the act of kindness that you're performing being good for you, it still is. But the research shows that random acts of kindness that you perform for other people can reduce stress through lowered cortisol, which is the stress hormone that we produce. It's good for your well-being in general, your mental, emotional well-being. It can even benefit your physical health. There are a lot of things that I say we a lot, but I've gone through in the last 3 years a long journey of self-discovery and learned a lot about myself, about the world, and things that I never would have thought of, and the way our mental health affects our physical health, and vice versa. And so performing random acts of kindness, doing nice things for others, can also have an enormous positive, net positive for ourselves. And remember that we tend to get out of the world what we put into the world. And also we tend to see in others what we want to see in others, right? When I started this podcast, there was a strong emphasis for me on my own cynicism. And I know I say when I started, I've got 2 episodes, but I 20 years in the service industry, in restaurants, working as a bartender or waiter, you develop a certain amount of cynicism. And I think in the first episode, I call it realism. And just, I think, taking a lot of the filters off of the world, because you deal with a lot of people and you see lots of good and lots of bad, and the bad is what tends to stick out in our minds. We remember that stuff more. But if you are looking for good in people, you're going to see the good in people. If you're looking for the bad in people, you're going to see the bad in people. And so I've had some breakthroughs in mental health recently that I don't know. For the first time in my life, I'm starting to see the positive in people more, which feels weird. Sometimes I find myself thinking, I don't know, when somebody runs a red light, I should have called that person an asshole. Not like they could hear me, but that's just what I should have done. In my head, that's just what I would do. I didn't honk or, throw up the middle finger. I didn't do that kind of stuff at people, but my kids will tell you better than anybody that, yeah, I yelled at people quite a bit from inside my car. They couldn't, whatever. I mean, I think we're all guilty of that. And I find lately I'm just letting that stuff go and understanding that I can't control. I mean, not that I was trying to control them before, but it doesn't matter. It's so meaningless. Why let myself get worked up like that? It just doesn't matter. So remember that we tend to see, in others what we want to see or what we're looking for. So random acts of kindness, what what's involved in a random act of kindness? Does it have to cost a lot of money? Does it have to take a lot of time or effort, resources? No, of course not. It could be something simple like picking up the phone and calling an old friend, right? Or just telling somebody that you're proud of them, telling somebody that you're thankful for them. It could be. It could be. Um, I mean, I don't know why I took such a long pause there. I'm yeah, a lot going through my mind, but holding the door for people, letting somebody merge on the highway, which is just something we should always do, because it's really stupid not to. I mean, why? I don't know. I do have kind of a thing about not letting them merge if they don't have their turn signal on. How am I supposed to know what you're trying to do? Which is just me being petty. But anyway, those are all just examples of random acts of kindness that can briefly make somebody else feel better or feel good, and also have a net positive impact on you in your life. So why not? Uh, and the flip side of that coin is remembering to accept random acts of kindness. And this is something that in researching for these topics today, this got me really curious. Why are some people, or most people, a lot of people, unwilling to accept help when it's offered? We might say things like, "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose," or "I wouldn't want to burden you," right? And if somebody's, my feeling is that if somebody's offering help, maybe some people just say it to be nice and they're expecting you to say no because that's just how we are. But rarely, if I just feel like if somebody's offering help, then there would be no implied imposition or burden, right? They're offering the help, so they know the consequences of offering that help ahead of time, which is performing the task they're offering to perform. So clearly, you're not imposing on them because they're offering the help. But I wanted to know a little bit more about this topic and why we're so unwilling to accept help when it's offered, and where does this come from? Is it, I don't know, is it something that happens everywhere? Is it I don't know. I was curious about why that is. What part of human nature makes us unable to accept help? And it turns out it has a lot to do with cultural norms, especially of independence and self-reliance, particularly in Western culture and more particularly in the United States, where we have a culture that places a lot of emphasis on self-reliance, and there's a fear of imposition because of the social norm of reciprocal relationships, and we fear because those reciprocal relationships are valued, we're wary of creating an imbalance in the relationship. Oh no, you've helped me. Now I have to remember to do something nice for you. You know? And I don't think I said it earlier. How many people are offering help with the expectation of reciprocity? I mean, maybe they are, and again, and part of that fear of imbalancing the relationship, maybe there's not a fear of that person who's offering help expecting reciprocity, but again, they could hold it over your head later, down the road when they need help moving or something, and they're like, "Hey, remember when I, helped you bathe your dog? I need help moving." So come help me. And it's pretty hard to say no, I guess, when they've done something nice for you, and then you're like, nah, yeah, you helped me, but I'm not gonna help you. Uh, Pretty hard to, I don't know. I think most people would find that hard to say no when the other person has helped us. There's also a fear of vulnerability and um, uh, maybe not a fear of vulnerability, but there is a certain level of vulnerability and intimacy that come with accepting an offer of help. And when vulnerability is exposed, it can make people uncomfortable. And so we don't want to accept the help because it makes us vulnerable, or it exposes that vulnerability, and it requires admitting that you couldn't do it by yourself. But who's going to hold it against you when you can't move a couch by yourself up flights of stairs? I mean, how are you supposed to pivot correctly when you're by yourself moving a couch? You need some friends. And accepting help also creates albeit a small amount, I would think, but a certain level of intimacy. And depending on the relationship, maybe the person helping you, maybe you're just acquaintances, you don't know each other that well, and that particular relationship may not be ready. Reminds me of Seinfeld when, what's the baseball player's name? I'm going to think of it as soon as I'm done recording. But anyway, the baseball player, Jerry and him meet, and they almost, it's almost like they're dating. And then the baseball player asks Jerry to help him move. And it's, they're not there yet. I mean, they're not, who is it? Kramer or somebody says, what's next? He's going to ask you to drive him to the airport? And so there is that certain level of intimacy. I never thought about that till just this moment, that's kind of what they were making fun of, is that level of intimacy in whatever relationship it is, whether it's just a friend or whatever. So I also wondered, has this fear of accepting help, has it always been this way? Is this, I know Americans and maybe Western cultures have a long history of self-reliance and being proud of what we can do ourselves. But, how long has this fear of accepting help been as prominent as it is now? I think I asked the question earlier, does it happen everywhere? Part of that I've already answered in terms of, this is more a dominant quality in Western culture and the United States. But no, it doesn't, definitely doesn't, this fear of accepting help doesn't exist everywhere. So historically, going back to, how long this has been going on, it used to be that there was a larger focus on communal living and extended family structures, right? So you were closer with people. You had family around to help, and you knew there was just more of a community-based living. We weren't as isolated or independent as we are now. And so because of that, you always had friends and family around and people around, and help was far more frequently given and accepted because there was a constant sense of reciprocity. Everybody was giving back to each other. And it just made me think about I had an uncle who recently passed away from bone cancer. He had prostate cancer that metastasized to his bones. And I went to visit him in the hospital, I guess probably about a month before he passed away. we had a really good chat. And at one point, while we were chatting, he brought up the fact that people don't seem to know their neighbors anymore. That we just don't, we don't go stand on the fence and chat with, not, I say we all the time, and some people out there do this probably still, but by and large, we're not as connected with our neighbors, with our community as we used to be. And then it was at the memorial service, my other uncle, his brother, was talking about not seeing family as much as we used to and getting together, and he blamed that in part on social media. We don't need to get together because we keep everybody updated constantly. We always know what's going on. So there's not as much need to get together. And I think, in my opinion, something that was lost was that ability to accept, to offer and receive help from people. And there's a large part of the world that still exists in societies that have are more based on community and interdependence than we are in the United States. Those qualities are more valued than we value them here. So there's a greater willingness in those types of communities to accept help. Whereas by contrast, the United States and a lot of Western cultures tend to be more individualistic and place more emphasis on the independence ideal. And that can make it difficult to accept help graciously. Not just help, just saying that out loud, accepting help graciously, but some people find it really hard to accept compliments graciously, or, and help. I mean, all kinds of things. We're just more independent. That's fine. So it's really my hope with this podcast to dive more often into the human psyche and learn more. Here we go. Mostly for my own sake, because I don't know. This is stuff that's really interesting to me, and I want to learn as much as I can. I'm a person who's very involved in my own therapy, and in the last few years, sorting out various disorders that I have, and trying to find my own way in life. I know it's misleading, all the gray hair, but I'll be 42 later this year, and so a big part of me, and my wife says this all the time, it feels like I'm just starting my life at 40. And so these topics of the human mind and how it works, and the things that it's capable of pulling off without us even knowing are just enormously interesting to me. And I'm so glad to be able to research some of these things and share my thoughts with you. And so I hope that you continue to come back and learn some more along with me. In the next episode, at least in part, I want to discuss something called the self-determination theory, which was developed by two psychologists, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. Just another really fascinating topic, and of course kind of follows this path of egoism, altruism, and learning more about the mind and how we interact with others. So thanks so much for being here. I look forward to researching that topic and bringing it to you very soon. My goal is to get a new episode up every week. I'm really going to try to do that, and my kids are going back to school soon, so it'll be much more likely that I'll be able to do that. But thanks again for joining me, and I just hope you all have a wonderful day. Cheers.